Today we're telling a story with a unique theme, Appalachian towns that were submerged beneath TVA lakes. Specifically, we'll be talking about Loyston and Butler in Tennessee, two communities that, despite being underwater, refuse to disappear. Hello folks, I'm Steve Gilly, along with Rod Mullins, and this is another one of the stories of Appalachia.
Steve, I did not know the story about Butler, Tennessee. When we started talking about this before we recorded, we started talking about New Butler, Old Butler, and so forth. And I said, Old Butler, and you said, Old Butler's underwater. New Butler is here. And I did not know, I knew there was a Butler, Tennessee, but I did not know that there was a New Butler and an Old Butler. But this is also, I think, a little bit, it's kind of a coincidence too. I've never heard of Loyston before until we got ready to start putting this thing together.
Well, living over here in East Tennessee, I've heard of Butler ever since I've been here. Loyston, I kind of remember a little bit, but you know, that's a bit far away. My thought was that Butler was the only town that had been drowned, but then apparently a listener thought that Loyston would be a good story for us. So that's why we're doing this podcast today.
Okay. Both
for Loyston and for Butler, the two towns that were drowned by the Tennessee Valley Authority.
Okay.
Both Loyston and Butler have fascinating histories that were dramatically changed by the TVA. The TVA, of course, had set up for flood control and to produce hydroelectric power. So let's get started first with Loyston, a ghost town in Union County that was inundated by the waters of the Clinch River after the completion of Norris Dam in 1936. Now, Loyston was located near where Mill Creek empties into the Clinch River. Mill Creek's drainage carved a broad valley known as Big Valley, flanked on the south by Lone Mountain and on the east by Big Ridge, which, incidentally, is the very reason that Loyston existed at all.
Well, Steve, Loyston was established in the early 19th century around a foundry that was built by a man by the name of John Loy. Now, the foundry took advantage of a lot of iron ore deposits around that area at nearby Big Ridge. From that foundry, that sprang forth the community known as Loy or Loy's Crossroads, eventually becoming Loyston around 1894. Now, Loyston grew into a trading center for local farmers thanks to mainly its location along State Highway 61. By the early 1930s, Loyston had around 70 residents and consisted of a post office, 2 general stores, a filling station, a cafe, a mill, and a barber shop. All you'd need to have just a little taste of home. In the 1780s, German immigrant Henry Sharp built a frontier fort called Sharp Station nearby, which eventually became the site of a church, the Sharp's Chapel Methodist Episcopal Church. By the 1930s, Sharp's descendants were still prominent members of the church of that community, and they highlighted the deep roots that many families had in the area.
Another early settler, Robert Stewksbury, moved to Loyston around 1800. His descendants continued to live in the area and even operated one of the community's general stores, which was quite successful, generating significant sales and profits. But everything changed when the Tennessee Valley Authority began planning the Norris Dam project. The dam, like the others built by the TVA, was intended for flood control and hydroelectric power. But that meant that part of the Clinch River Valley, including Loyston, would be flooded. Most of Loyston's residents were forced out by eminent domain, and the TVA and the University of Tennessee's Department of Agriculture helped these families relocate. Many formed a new community, aptly named New Loyston, on higher ground to the south. Others moved to Knoxville, Anderson County, Blount County, or Loudoun County. Despite the disruption, the community spirit remained intact. Today, the valley where Loyston once stood is submerged under the widest part of Norris Lake, known by folks in the area, Rod, as the Loyston Sea. How about that?
What a name. Definitely something like not anything like Lost Sea or whatever we used to see advertised on the interstate as we were going down on trips and see it on the side of barns. But still, let's turn our attention now to Butler, Tennessee, another town that faced a similar fate. Butler was originally located on Roan Creek and its confluence with the Watauga River, and the settlement began there in 1768, and for many years the community was called Smith's Mill, after a grist mill built by Zeke Smith around 1820. After the Civil War, it was renamed in honor of Colonel Roderick R. Butler, an interesting man in his own right. Yes, and a very German name, but matter of fact. Roderick Butler was born April 9th, 1827 in Wytheville, Virginia. Sadly, his father died before he was a year old, and at the age of 13, he was bound out as an apprentice to learn the trade of being a tailor. After a 6-year tailor's apprentice, he moved to, ironically, Taylorsville, Tennessee, where, well, we now know the town as Mountain City, and yes, he went to work there as, you guessed it, a tailor.
Well, he was a man of ambition, Rod. At 21, Butler began reading the law with Carter County Attorney Carrick W. Nelson, a way many young attorneys learned the practice of law when they didn't go to law school back in those days. By 1853, he was admitted to the bar and started practicing law in Johnson and Carter counties. Early on, Butler aligned himself with the Whig Party and was appointed postmaster of Taylorsville by President Millard Fillmore. He was also elected as a county judge in 1855 and served as a major in the 1st Battalion of the Tennessee Militia around 1850. His political career really took off, though, when he was elected to the Tennessee House of Representatives in 1859, and he was one of the few legislators who actually voted against Tennessee secession and joining the Confederacy in 1861, actually joining with others to petition Nashville to allow East Tennessee to form its own state and remain in the Union. And that, Rod, resulted in a Confederate occupation of the region and marked Butler as a staunch Lincolnite and Unionist.
You know, Steve and I talked about this before. I mean, in East Tennessee, you were either Union or you were Confederate. But, you know, it was just one way or the other. And there was a strong presence in East Tennessee of unions, of the Union, I should say. But let's go to this and talk about it. Those views led to the arrest by Confederate authorities on the charges of treason in 1862. Though he was acquitted, he faced another arrest shortly thereafter. With the help of friends, he managed to escape to Kentucky. There, he was authorized by General Ambrose Burnside to raise a Union Army regiment, where he served as a lieutenant colonel until 1864. After the war, Butler's political influence only grew. He was a delegate to several Republican national conventions and also played a significant role in Tennessee's Reconstruction. In 1867, he was elected to Congress. Well, despite all of his success, Butler faced his share of controversies. In 1870, he was censured by the House of Representatives for accepting payment to recommend a cadet to West Point. Well, we don't go through that today. Well, quite, do we, Steve? I don't know. But anyway, he managed to weather this storm and continue his political career, serving in Congress until 1875, and again from 1887 to 1889. Roderick R. Butler passed away in Mountain City on August 18, 1902, at the age of 75. He was buried in the Mountain View Cemetery in Mountain City.
And, Rod, the town name for Butler was a thriving community with churches, schools, and small family farms specializing in beans, tobacco, and timber. In 1902, the railroad was extended to the town, bringing economic opportunity and transforming it into a bustling hub with its own police department, public works, school system, roller skating rinks, movie theaters, and grocery stores. But Butler, like Loyston, was prone to severe flooding. Major floods hit the town many times, with a devastating one in 1940 that destroyed homes and washed out the railroad. That absolutely would be devastating for a small town. In response, Congress approved the Watauga Dam project, which was completed in 1948.
Well, those rising waters of Watauga Lake meant that Butler, with a population of about 600 at that time, was going to have to be relocated. Now, this massive relocation involved moving 125 homes, 50 businesses, and 1,281 graves to higher ground. Not anything like what you've seen in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, where they just flood the valley and that's the end of it. They tried to relocate them. Okay? The new Butler was established on Tennessee State Route 67, while the original site was submerged under the lake. Well, despite these drastic changes, the spirit of Butler lived on. The original town, now known as Old Butler, as it's called, is remembered through a museum and the annual Old Butler Days. And that festival happens every August. In 1983, a drawdown of the lake briefly exposed the remains of Old Butler, allowing former residents to visit their old home, a poignant memory for many of the people that grew up of Old Butler.
Now, this is a fascinating story. It's interested me for many, many years about how they took an entire town and moved it. And you just imagine, what we said, movie theaters, a roller skating rink, businesses and all that, take all that up and move it up the hill, basically is what they did. New Butler is a very small place. I went up there just a few days ago, and I was surprised at how small the actual downtown business section was. Mm-hmm. But a very nice place out in the country. I could just imagine buying a house and moving out someplace like that. Very, very nice place.
Two places I can think of that kind of closely resemble this, but it's not flooding. Pikeville, of course, when they rerouted the river, and then also Grundy, which they took everything that was part of Grundy and they kind of lifted it up, put it up on a hill, and they still exist today. But the flooding risk, it's still one of those things. But we're talking about Butler and, Loyston, Butler especially. They were very prone for a lot of flooding back in those days. So they had to do something, and this was probably one of the best shots that they had at being able to do something. But, still 600 people, 125 homes, 50-some businesses, graves, and so forth. I know that there's been graves that have been flooded before, and I know they try to get bodies up and so forth. They try to exhume the bodies and so forth, but that's not to mention that Indian graves or something like that could be around through there or something that's unknown. So it's one of those hit or miss sort of guess things. But when you have to do it, you have to do it. But it's kind of transformed both of these towns into, something that kind of goes beyond just the changes that took place.
Yeah. Well, think about it this way, too. Because of the sacrifice of those two towns, the flooding down the rivers from where the dams are have been pretty much stopped.
Right.
Unless it's a super torrential rain. So that's a benefit. There's hydroelectric power. That's another benefit. Mm-hmm. And there's recreation, which is the third benefit. You've got boats, you've got people out swimming, you've got people out fishing. It's other than the folks that lost their property, right, it's a benefit for most everybody.
Well, and I would be curious as to understand. I'm thinking probably this was something along the lines of what TVA does every year, especially when it starts getting into the fall of the year, and that's the drawdown of the lake, just to make sure that they've got everything under control, flood-wise, for anything that happens wintertime. But that would have been just so unique to go and just see the former buildings and see what was there underwater, what you could see of what Old Butler used to look like.
Well, there's a picture that I've seen that shows Butler, the Old Butler, when they did the drawdown in 1983. And you can see the foundation of the old school that used to be there.
Wow.
I mean, it's still underwater, but the water's just barely over top of it.
Wow.
Yeah. Very interesting story. And we thank the listener that passed this suggestion on to us. It's a very good story, and thanks a bunch for letting us know about it. And folks, that's the story of two Tennessee towns that rest in a watery grave beneath Norris Lake and Watauga Lake. Another one of the stories of Appalachia. Now, be sure to subscribe to the Stories Podcast on your favorite podcast app and follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as well. Till next we meet, y'all take care. So long, everybody.